everyone thinks you need to be a surgeon or you want to be an RN, and those are lovely professions. But there is a third option that's just as integral to patient care as those fields are. So part of that promoting our profession and having people understand that there's this other team member that is caring for you, and it's another option for a career is important, which is part of why I do the podcast.
Clock in, scrub up, and join us behind the red line. You're listening to First Case, a perioperative podcast bringing you exciting interviews, engaging discussions, and innovative solutions that are changing the way patients receive surgical care. Each episode, we talk to frontline staff, perioperative leadership, and nursing entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the back table to the boardroom, from wheels in to wheels out, we tackle the real-life issues affecting the OR. Whether you're tuning in for surgical service education or inspiration, we're glad you're here. And now it's time to roll back and start the first case.
This week on First Case, we speak with Chris Blevins, chair of the Surgical Technology program at South College and the founder and host of the Scrub Life podcast. And it's an excellent podcast. We're going to get Chris's story and learn a little bit more about her and really the passion that she has for continuing to elevate the surgical technologists out there, the program and the profession.
Chris is amazing. I love her passion. I love the voice that she gives to the surgical tech profession. And when I was looking at putting together a season that was dedicated completely to professional development, I could not think of a better person to talk about the unique challenges that surgical techs face than to talk to Chris, because she just knows so much and she will willingly and gladly share it. And she's not afraid to talk about those hard topics and the ones that we really need to discuss so that we can improve the profession and improve even the working conditions for everyone in the operating room. So it's a treat to have her on the show today.
Don't go anywhere. We're going to be right back with Chris Blevins after a short break.
I'm Melanie Perry.
And I'm Justin Poulin.
A 17 Studios production, you're listening to First Case.
Joining us now is Chris Blevins, chair of the Surgical Technology program at South College and founder and host of the Scrub Life podcast. This whole season, professional development. That's the topic. And we're going to be focusing on professional development for surgical technologists today. But before we even do that, Chris, I want to introduce you, and I want to kind of use the Scrub Life podcast as a great example of professional development that might be a little outside of the box. And that is chasing your passions is absolutely in the wheelhouse of professional development and doing something that you probably didn't go to school for, but you learned and taught yourself to do on your own that isn't necessarily a skill set that relates to surgical technology, but absolutely has furthered your career and your ability to teach. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Melanie, for having me. It's weird being on the other side of the mic. We were talking about that earlier, but gosh, I'm so excited to be here. So thank you very much.
All right, Chris. Well, let's have you talk a little bit about your career, what brings you to today, and I want to hear the story about why you started the Scrub Life.
Oh my gosh, so many things. Yeah. So my career, I think I started out the way that many certified surgical technologists do, where it wasn't even something that we were geared or goal oriented towards. Like a lot of high school students, I thought, I'm going to go be a doctor. And then so that was my whole kind of goal in my younger years and throughout high school. And I went and I played volleyball for a college in New York, and then came home and was hit by a drunk driver.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, I know, right? It sounds horrible. I'm fine. We're good. But my mom and I were hit by a drunk driver, and basically there went my volleyball career, to be completely honest. And so therefore also went my scholarship. And after that, I was just, I think, in a weird headspace. And so I have an uncle who is an anesthesiologist, and I was going to school and working and just not really sure what I wanted to do. And he suggested to come into the operating room, and I would be what we now refer to as a patient care tech. I was an orderly, is what we said back in the day. And so I said yes. And I swear that is the reason that I am here with you guys today, is because I'm pretty sure I have no clue how to say the word no. But saying the word yes to these different opportunities that came was instrumental in me finding what ultimately became my passion, which was surgery. I was on the job trained. Back then, we didn't have all of the credentialing that is incredibly important, along with the education that comes behind it. Thank God. But I think I'm notorious for just winging it, and that it didn't go outside of the operating room very often as well. But I just said yes, and we had gastric bypass surgery. Was the Roux-en-Y technique had just been developed and was being utilized more often in the operating room. And so therefore, more morbidly obese patients required more retraction. And so a surgeon asked for just another set of hands. And so literally I was like one of those kind of robotic dolls that you would just stand there, and they gowned and gloved me, and they put me in a certain position and said, "Do not move." And I said, "Yes, ma'am." And then they walked me to the patient and put my hand up into what is the diaphragm, right? To lift up, and "Don't move." I'm like, "Yes, ma'am." And here I am. I'm literally feeling this patient's heart beat. And of course, in my naivete, I was like, "Oh my God, I'm holding a heart." Not quite, Chris, but good enough, right? So tears just start flowing. I mean, I am bawling, and I'm standing to the right of this incredibly intimidating surgeon. And he looks over at me, and he has this very thick accent, and he's like, "Are you crying?" And I, "No." Totally was. "There's no crying in my surgery." And he starts yelling at me because he's scared I'm going to contaminate his field. Good reason. So good old Paula, the circulator, she comes over. "Honey," she was super Southern. She said, "Honey, you can't be crying in the surgery. You can't do it. You're going to get all..." So she takes my mask down. She tells me to hold my breath. She takes a tissue. She blows my nose. She puts my mask back on.
Oh.
She's like, now quit. You're going to be fine." And after that, I fell in love, and I was like, I don't want to do anything else. So ultimately I thought, gosh, I should probably get trained in it. Right.
Imagine that, right?
Right. Yeah. So yeah, I went to school and just ate it up, and I became a trauma scrub, and I've done everything, I've done transplants and eyes and hearts and GYN and labor and delivery. And I don't know, I just soaked it up, right? Because that's what you do when you're passionate about something. You say yes. Right.
Well, I'm hearing you're so passionate about it, and you're making me just, hang on to my desk as I'm listening to you tell the story. But what was your favorite, or what is your favorite specialty to scrub? I always like to ask this question, but what's your favorite specialty to be in?
I think for me, it was any big belly case, because I was just a trauma girl by heart. And, some people say this, my brain skips beats, right? But it works really, really well in traumatic, circling the drain situations. And it's probably because you act on instinct and you don't have time for self-doubt or to question the next move. And I love that. I love the intensity of the situation and the responsibility that literally the steps that you are taking right now could make a difference between that patient seeing their family members, or not. And to me, it's just the most honorable, noble profession. And I try desperately to kind of share that with my students now, and sometimes successfully and sometimes not.
Well, yeah, sometimes so. I think it's good to help people realize the value and the real benefit that the OR receives from a knowledgeable surgical tech, and how that tech can make a difference. Makes such a difference in the outcome of a case, especially these trauma cases where there is no time for self-doubt. There is no time to question. You just have to go and you have to do, and you have to know the next step. And I have had cases saved time and time and time again because my scrub tech knew what was going on. They knew exactly what was needed, and they were telling me what to get as I was going to get 4 other things. They're like, oh, by the way, the vascular surgeon's coming in and he's going to need this, and this. So go get him because I know he's going to ask for him. And it's just amazing, the knowledge base and the contribution that a surgical tech makes in that OR is such a valuable part of the team, which actually leads me to a question about the shortage. Why do we not have enough surgical techs? We just don't have enough anywhere.
Because nobody knows what we do. No one knows who we are, right? I think that's probably our biggest issue right now. And there's really good reason for it. Unlike our incredible nursing teammates in the operating room, we don't go see the patient during pre-op. We don't meet the family. Our profession stays into the assigned operating room that we have for the day. And so by the time you get to us, you've had this lovely medication that relaxes you, right, both mentally and physically. But most of the time it's Versed, and Versed is an amnesiatic. So most of the time you don't remember getting it. And then you're wheeled into the operating room where, by the way, I already look like a ninja, right? You don't have any idea who I am. You're super loopy and drugged. I might hold your hand. I might help position you. I get cricoid pressure, like all of those things that help you be safe. But then we operate on you, we bandage you, we make you beautiful, we get you back on that bed. But unlike our nurses who nursing and anesthesia go to post-op, go to recovery, give report, we don't. We stay in the operating room because our job is turnover, right? Time is money. And we have to turn over quickly and get ready for our next patient, our next surgeon, and that next procedure. So you're drugged when you meet me. You're drugged when you go away. And Grey's Anatomy doesn't help, right?
No, it does not.
No, we're just this gorgeous gloved hand with this instrument. Mm-hmm. Just perfect, right? So I think that's part of it, is that everyone thinks you need to be a surgeon or you want to be an RN, and those are lovely professions. But there is a third option that's just as integral to patient care. Those fields are. So part of that, promoting our profession and having people understand that there's this other team member that is caring for you, and that's another option for a career is important, which is part of why I do the podcast. It's not why I started, but it's definitely what keeps me going. If I can just get one more person out there to be like, I know who's taking care of me, because advocacy is so important. And if you don't know whose hands are in your abdomen when you're asleep, how are you going to advocate for the best care?
Right. No, I just can completely agree. I was actually talking to a friend of mine from the hospital that I used to work at, and they are struggling right now with surgical techs and not having enough for staff. And they're training the RNs they have on staff to scrub now, which is not something they did before because they just don't have enough scrub techs and they cannot fill those positions. And I think that awareness really is a huge part of that. The general population doesn't know that a surgical tech position exists because and we would see it too when we would look at Press Ganey scores or in these other things, when patients would talk about their experience coming through the hospital, they would, of course, remember their surgeon, and they think their doctor's there from the time they roll in to the time they roll out. And we all know that's not true. But, and they remember the nurse because they meet the nurse when they're awake and they meet the nurse before they've ever gotten Versed. But most of the time they're giving credit to their surgeon and of course, I'm not saying that surgeons are not taking care of their patients, but there's a huge team that's doing it. And primarily patients don't realize the depth and breadth of the expertise that's coming into that OR when they come to surgery. And, it's just the shortage is I think it's getting bigger and bigger as more surgical cases and as we see more ASCs and we see more cases being moved to different types of facilities. We need more surgical techs to make that happen. And they're just not there.
Yeah. And there's another reason I think for the shortage. And, we have to talk about like the fiscal responsibility. And I think that, if you compare us to the nurses, we're a pretty young profession. The role of a surgical technologist came about during World War II. But I think that our educational component, back in the day, and I'm the chair of the Education and Professional Standards Committee for AST. And so it's kind of ironic that I was like, hey, I was on the job trained. I did not know what I was doing. So let's fix that, right? But, it's, we've come full circle, really. But what I think the problem is that financially, the surgical technologist today is not paid for what they are educated to do. I think we're behind in that spectrum. And so that's another issue, right? Because we all have bills, we have families, we have financial responsibilities, and there are so many opportunities for a 2-year degree, which we are now required to have an associate degree, thank goodness. But that 2-year degree, I could go to 2 years in nursing, and I can make more out of that degree than I can from my associate in surgical technology. And so that disparity is another reason why, you need certified surgical technologists. Like we need national legislation, and we do have it in many different states that certifications required, degrees are required, but it's not nationwide. And so, in that aspect, we've got some ground to gain. And we have to advocate for our profession and understand that we're worth financially to that institution, what nurses are in the operating room. And that's going to take legislative efforts. That's going to take, I think, a lot of like ground local movement for people to say, this was 24 months and a national certification. And this is all that I've learned. And this is why I'm important in that role. And it's okay to be paid what you're worth, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think advocacy, letting people know that surgical techs as a profession that exists, and this is a job that you can do, and that you can be good at it and you can do it, but also advocacy for yourself as a surgical tech, like you're saying. I think too, it's like the operating room. We know how important surgical techs are because we work with you day in and day out, but does the CFO, does administration, do people outside of the OR that are within the hospital that are making those financial pay structures and decisions, do they understand? Do they know? And so I think you're right. Advocacy for your profession, for your training and education, and for the value that you provide is huge. And it needs to go to those human resources or those people who are deciding, because you bring up such a good point. A 2-year associate's degree, 2 years of college. College is college. 2 years of college and a certification. You have put a lot of time and money in investing in yourself and your education. And nurses expect their paycheck to reflect that. And so I think as surgical techs that you should as well. That's just, of course you should, I think that makes perfect sense.
We're behind the curve, and nursing professions older. Also, I think that you all have done a great job in coming together as a group, especially ARN, and really promoting all of those items and those pathways. I think also we're a little behind in that aspect too. And so it's going to take time, but it's going to take passion and that clear voice to continue to encourage people instead of giving up on your profession and leaving and going to PA school or nursing school and beyond. Stay, fight for it. What you do every day matters, whether you're recognized for it or not. And you can make a difference in this profession.
So how do we establish a national standard then? Because don't you think if there were national standards and everybody in every state was doing things the exact same way, that you would have a better leg to stand on, so to speak, for the push and that advocacy?
I do. And AST has legislative efforts in various states. It's not in every state. I think they pick and choose each year. And we have lobbyists that are paid to be able to advocate for the profession. COVID, put a lot of things.
Sure did.
We're not immune to that, right? Like, pandemic COVID. But COVID, kind of stopped that because there are so many legislative bodies that did not meet in person or kind of pause their agenda and their formatting so that, we could be safe, which all the respect in the world for that decision. But I think also it is advocating to those decision makers at a legal standpoint. So our House of Representatives, and being able to tell them what it is that we do and the importance of it. And there's so many states that have done that. There are these state assemblies of AST, which are the state legislative bodies for our professional association. There are some that have actually gone to their representatives, gone to their Congress people, and they've put on mock surgeries. I think, we can talk all day long, but a picture's worth 1,000 words, even if it's a podcast. And so I think that, being able to really explain and illustrate, this is the person that is doing that. This is the person who is setting up your entire sterile back table. This is the person who must understand and be able to anticipate the needs of the surgeon at a faster rate than what the surgeon's asking for. We have to practice perfectly. We cannot have a break in sterile technique. Otherwise, that leads to infection and possibly harm or death. So being able to kind of verbalize and show that to the people who are making the decisions so that they can then go back to their colleagues and say, hey, this is serious, this matters, and this could affect you and me. And I think that we're really successful in doing that in some states, and I think some states we're not. But time and continued passion, continued discussions like this, I think are key to being able to move the national kind of rules and regulations.
Do you think having the name technician in your title affects why y'all get paid like you do compared to, because people see it as a tech?
Yeah, I think it's technologist is the appropriate term. And so, yeah, we get called technicians quite often, which makes you think of the patient care tech and, that orderly kind of role. I do think that is, I think that allows people to make assumptions about our position. So, yeah, I also think that, the credentials that we have after our names, CST, that's actually trademarked by AST. So you must be a KHEP accredited graduate taking the NBSDSA exam in order to be able to use those credentials. And I think that there are some people out there that are hired under that umbrella that don't actually need it too. So a lot of it's just ignorance to all of the, the little details.
Chris, what is the pay? What on a national average, what's the national average pay? And I'm going somewhere with this for a surgical technologist.
That's a really good question. So I came from Fort Worth. So the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, my graduates at these hospitals systems were making anywhere, 5 years ago, it was $25 an hour to $27, $28. But here in East Tennessee, you can go work at Buc-ee's and make more money than a base pay starting out surgical tech. That's ridiculous.
It makes me think about the plight of sterile processing very similarly, hidden kind of behind the scenes, not direct patient care contact, but definitely directly tied to patient outcomes. And what's interesting is Dr. Peter Nickel, who is the chief medical officer for our sister podcast, Beyond Clean and Sterile Processing, he says that and he's been on this show too, but he says hospitals really have, sort of an obligation to the community to ensure wellness, right? And community health. And one of the things that we know statistically is that if you're employed below the poverty line, that you are tied directly, statistically, towards having poorer health. So why would we employ people below the poverty line? And I feel like in this case, there are some areas of the country that are getting paid pretty good, but I also know in some metropolitan areas, sterile processing technicians are making that 25 to 27. Now that's a desirable area, in some cases, and it can be as low as 15, to your point about Buc-ee's, or, a Home Depot or a Lowe's or a McDonald's these days is paying the same amount of money. And that's really where it does become kind of like frustrating. And it does take legislation, but it also takes an acknowledgement, and it may also take a shortage, because who's going to go spend the money, right, to get to this point if there isn't a reward at the end? And these are the kinds of things we need to start thinking about. And the other thing that Peter said was that these jobs, and I want to really tie this to the distinction that you made that I think is really important, technologist, not technician, is that the idea of technician basically removes the person from having any kind of direct relationship with a patient outcome. And that's the mistake. That's the fundamental mistake in the mentality of it. And so when we fundamentally remove them like that, and we start to look at pay, wages, and everything else, the truth is, though, that it's a high stress, high output, low margin for error environment. And other jobs that are highly skilled technical jobs, their wage relationship would show a significant disparity for folks that are working in healthcare that have a direct tie to patient outcomes. And I don't mean to shift this in another direction, but I have to ask you this other question, and it's a little bit away from professional development from like a degree or legislature or whatnot. I'm more thinking of the environment in the operating room. And I'm thinking about the surgeons that get attached to certain surgical technologists and won't relink, like, nope, only so-and-so and so-and-so can scrub my case. And otherwise, that's it. Nobody else. And then, we all know the problems that creates when so-and-so and so-and-so gets sick.
Oh, yeah. Then they get your cell phone number.
But away from that.
And then they call you.
But that's right. And they do call you. So, but we know the problems with that operationally, like, well, what happens when they don't come in? And, what kind of a day does everybody else have to have, but really I want to talk about it from another level, which is how much does that allow the rest of the surgical technologists on the team to grow professionally? I think that we just did an interview on, kind of like limiting beliefs, right? And, if you believe, because in your work environment, the surgeons that maybe are doing the procedures that you wish you were involved in, that you want to get exposed to, that are going to help you grow your career, don't think you're good enough, that can really contribute to that very limiting mentality. And so I just, I wonder, do you feel like, well, on one hand, this is okay, and on the other hand, it's not? Or do you 100% against it? And do you agree that it can limit people's professional growth?
No, I completely agree that it can. I think that, we in the operating room can be extremely territorial, whether you're a nurse or a tech. And they do. It's my case. These are my surgeries. This is my surgeon, my doctor, right? We are just as territorial over them as they are over us. And I think that we do a horrible job of taking care and nurturing our younger, precepting those students that are in clinical. My students do 9 months in a hospital, 3 days a week in these operating rooms. And that's truly where their education begins, right? It's just repeated exposure. And when you have a preceptor that is horribly unforgiving and not a teacher at heart, and not everyone is, but let me tell you right now, if you're getting that extra pay in order to be a preceptor, which many facilities give out, you've now accepted that personal responsibility and you owe it to that person, because ultimately the jobs are given to the students by their clinical site. Everybody has this shortage, right? And a clinical rotation at a hospital is the best job interview ever. It's, 9 months of seeing not only where they started, but how do they progress? How do they work as a team member? I tell my students, it's a job interview from day one. And so, if you are a clinical site and you are horrible to these students, and this is not an educational realm, then are they going to want to work with you? No. And so there's that whole domino effect, right? Because now you can't get anybody in because you have a bunch of mean girls, right? And then you are more resentful and bitter because you are still overworked. You are still underpaid. Your call schedule is crazy. But yet here are these opportunities to add to that team. And instead of doing so and kind of mentoring, you're doing the exact opposite. So I think as a profession and as a facility, culture really matters. And it's a top-down thing. If you have your surgical services manager and your OR director, and they are encouraging that growth, encouraging kind of just super supporting of the youth and of the future of your profession, that is addictive, right? That passion is so addictive. But you have to have those people in those positions who care and who don't accept less than that. I think some hospital systems are doing it phenomenally, but there are others that maybe aren't. The problem in the cloud, I think, over it is so big and so multifaceted, but what is it going to take to fix it? It's going to take advocacy. It's going to take pay. It's going to take culture change. It's going to take us stopping ourselves, right? So we constantly step on our own foot, I think, as a profession. And so we have to stop doing that too. Local, federal, state, Congress, it's our professional association. It's all of it. But I don't know, you get people in there that care, right? And they constantly have these discussions and we're honest. I think we have to not sugarcoat things. I think that we have to be real about where we're at as a whole and what we need to do and where we're falling short. And those kinds of tough conversations are hard to have sometimes.
And sometimes they're the ones that block you. That's the unfortunate thing. Sometimes when you talk real, especially when you're going through the legal stuff, it's even more likely to stunt you. It's a delicate balance there.
Oh, it really is. But it's worth it. Worth it.
Yeah. I think that ties in a little bit to our last interview with Lindsay, because it's the limiting mindset that it's not worth it, that it's not worth going through, that it's too much of a struggle and I can't do it. And the positive mindset like you have says it is worth it. This challenge, and it's exactly what it is, this challenge and this potential stumbling block that we have of this unknown of our profession, of people not knowing who we are, of not validating our expertise with the paycheck that we receive. We can overcome that, and we can do it as a group if we just don't lose sight of what we want. So this ties in really well with the interview we just did, and I'm loving, I'm loving all of the messaging. But I want to go we're running out of time, unfortunately, but I want to ask, when you and I talked prior to this interview, you were talking about some of the lessons that scrub techs as a whole, that the facilities and hospitals learned through the pandemic. Can you share that and shed some light on that before we go?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. There is that door opening, right? And you can get into the operating room. It starts as a student during your clinical rotation. You pass that certification exam, you get hired, woo, right? And you can learn a specialty, and there are ways to advance just within our small window. But what we found out during the pandemic is that, so many elective surgeries were canceled. If you weren't emergent or urgent and, not a gomer, but actual, holy crap, loss of life or limb, then you weren't being operated on. So we have this entire department within the hospital that is usually pretty profitable. Now you have a lot of people sitting there and you don't know what to do, right? We were being utilized outside of the operating room. I mean, we are the profession. We are the experts on asepsis, on sterile technique in the OR. We get more of that training than the doctors or the nurses do. That is our bread and butter. Well, we can take that expertise and we can go outside of the operating room. So we were able to do wound care changes. Many of us, we know how to catheterize, Foley insertion and proper DCing. All of that is a part of your education in school. So, we can do catheter care. And I know that's a whole other federal issue with CODIs and all that. But we have the ability to do those things. Many of us come from other backgrounds like CNA and MA. So we were able to take vital signs. We were able to document and entrance and exit from the hospital. We were able to educate people on the proper applying of our N95 masks. We wear N95s. We wear surgical masks all the time. So it was neat to be able to have that educational component. We were able to work in labor and delivery because COVID or not, babies were coming. So there are so many other areas of the hospital we found. And what was wonderful is that the hospital administration saw that. So now that opened up this kind of clinical ladder for advancement in ways that we as a profession, I don't think had the opportunity. And so now we're seeing surgical technologists. Remember that favorite surgeon, the one who is attached at the hip? Now CSTs are being used as service line coordinators. We're used in educational components, inventory, our sterile core, all of those things. We are able to take those skill sets that we have learned and utilized and grown and take them outside of the operating room specifically. And that provides other areas of advancement. And I think if you have those clinical ladders within our profession, very similarly to the way that our RNs do, then you're encouraging people to not just come into the profession of surgical technology, but stay and grow. And that is part of that, that ripping off of that self-limiting belief system, and also feeling very well supported by your hospital and ambulatory service and all of the things in between. I think that we need to continue to do so. Hopefully, God help us, we don't have another pandemic, but knowing that we were successful team members outside of an OR was eye-opening, not just for us, but for our colleagues across the hospital.
That's such a great lesson for healthcare to learn. And the reason I say that, and that's a very encouraging story too. And I'll tell you kind of my nursing story. I remember graduating as a nurse and feeling like I want to do something different with my career. Like I'd already worked with disabled kids for 5 summers while I went to nursing school. And then I went through nursing school as a CNA, and I actually enjoyed being a CNA a lot more than I did becoming a registered nurse. To be honest with you, I just had more people contact as a CNA. And that's what I found that I really, really loved. So what's interesting is a lot of the jobs that are upward mobility jobs require training that you don't get in formalized schooling, right? It's training in leadership. It's training in management. It's, all of these other things. You even mentioned moving into a role where you might be part of the supply chain. And yes, there are a few supply chain, colleges out there, but in large part, most of the people who wind up in supply chain kind of fall in there. And it may be that they have a different skill set that they brought to the table. And I think we have to recognize that having that baseline is key for whatever role you're coming in. But how we grow our own employees once they come into any organization is all about different non-formal types of training. And we can give people who have that desire to do different roles in healthcare that opportunity by nurturing the talent we have. And if you want to help prevent issues with shortages, you have to recognize that somebody has a desire and help get them that opportunity to continue moving. And that's how you get the advocates that you need coming out of your programs, the ones who are really passionate, and then also go to another level, with their careers to start talking about the importance at the C level, talking about the importance in other areas like supply chain, who might not necessarily know, especially if they're non-clinical, and, all of the ways that we weave throughout a healthcare organization. That's really what we need to do to have a more holistic view of, we talk about that, right? The patient and the continuum of care and this holistic view of care, but we need that same holistic view of caring for our employees, no matter how they come into the organization.
I think that you're seeing that also just even on a day-to-day basis within the operating room, because of this national shortage, you have people who are traveling, and these traveling CSTs are making a lot more money than the loyal embedded surge techs that are employed by the hospital. And that breeds resentment because, and then also you lose your employees because guess what? They're going to go to that next facility where there is a hiring sign-on bonus, or they're going to go work for that traveling agency where they can create their own schedule, and you're going to pay them 2 to 2.5, 3 times what you would have paid them when they were your employee. So we're missing that ability to say thank you, right? To reward loyalty. And I think that we're not doing justice to that as well. It's super expensive to train new employees in whatever role they're there for. So why not take those people that you've already trained, you've invested all of that money in, and they haven't left you, right? They're taking care of your patients day in and day out. You need to reward them too. And so I think that there's a responsibility by the hospitals to take a look at their own nest, if they will, and make sure that it's well stocked. And you can get creative with that. It's not always a raise. Good God, sometimes somebody just needs to be said, hey, thank you. Like, you're doing a great job. What you do matters. How can we make coming to work every day better? You know, somebody might say, give me a parking space. It's not like 500 yards from the back door when I'm coming in at 3 o'clock in the morning for a trauma. You know, it's not always money. We have to be creative in how we think, but also just recognize loyalty, recognize hard work. And that's going to lead to people staying and then going up that clinical ladder and serving in those other capacities that can also benefit you and your patient care.
Culture is king.
Yeah,
I
for
mean,
real.
we all know that.
Yeah.
Culture is king. Or queen. Let's say culture is queen. Yeah, let's say queen. Chris, you did a phenomenal job. This is not only, well, you did a phenomenal job on our podcast, but you do a phenomenal job on your podcast. And I can only imagine how different it is to be on the, interviewee side of the stage. So I want to thank you for that. And I hope we were great hosts because you were a great guest.
I love it. I could talk to y'all all day, like really. So it's totally fun. I think it's been really fun. And yeah, I could do this again every day.
Good. I hope you do. So
it's super fun. Yeah. Thank y'all for everything that you're doing. I love the collaboration. I just think sterile processing and RNs and CSTs and supply chain, all of it. Like it takes every single one of us to care for our patients. And so the fact that there is that collaboration outside of it to show that we work together even in podcast world, I think that that's just such a great example for our colleagues. And so more collaboration, I'm all for it. Absolutely.
That was Chris Blevins, chair of the surgical technology program at South College and founder and host of the Scrub Life podcast. Definitely check out Chris's podcast. She does a phenomenal job. You can definitely follow her on LinkedIn. Super active there. We talk about building culture and community, and we coined the phrase culture is queen on this episode. But honestly, I think you two are the queens of OR culture is when it comes to LinkedIn, Melanie. So very active, really creating lots of content, getting people engaged, so many conversations happening. And I do also want to echo what Chris said about collaborating. It's so important. As we hung up or ended the interview, I should say, we didn't hang up. We usually talk afterwards with our guests. We talked about just the breaking down the silos and really expanding all of our worldviews within healthcare beyond just our, particular department or role, et cetera. And I think that ties in so well with the theme of professional development.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, spreading awareness, like she talked about, and advocacy for the surgical tech profession, but then being able to collaborate with the other departments and really connect and recognize that we all have a shared common goal and that we are all working towards positive patient outcomes. It just makes us even better as a team, and it makes us better in our own profession when we can recognize that we've all got the same goal in mind.
Yeah. And elevating our professions and educating others that are outside of our professions, the importance and the high skill level and the stress, and comparing that to other industries and their, wage scales, I think is really important. But that's going to do it for this episode. But as a reminder, you can support us by subscribing to First Case on Apple, Amazon, or Google Podcasts. You can also find us on Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or search for us on your favorite podcast app. But what I really want you to do, I want you to download our smartphone app for iPhone and Android. Some of these episodes have bonus content. You're only going to get it there if you download the smartphone app. And while you're either subscribing to First Case on your favorite podcast app or downloading the app, we would really appreciate a rating and a review, because your feedback is important to us here. And honestly, when we talk about feedback, we want recommendations for future themes for seasons. We want recommendations on guests and topics, and we absolutely want to hear what you think about the show. You can send us that feedback by sending an email to info@firstcasemedia.com. On behalf of Melanie and myself, thanks so much for listening to this week's episode of First Case.